Welcome into TFW Live, the best kept secret in fantasy football. We keep that week one feeling going all year long. I'm Big Travie, joined here by one of my best friends, Austin Sear, and our guy, Johnny Game Time Hicks, is on baby duty. Much love to him, Jade and baby June. And a big welcome to Whisper Nation. What's going on? As always, we got to shout out the newest members of Whisper Nation, those who have subscribed and followed us on social media. We got a list. Here we go. Better Sports Network, Daniel O'Connell, Luke Sawhook, Troy King, Always Honest Abe, RJ, Remmel, Daniel Navarro, Tony McFeely, Paul M., Cracking the Bell, Cole Sylvie, Mike Lamplant, Alex Caruso, Ala Y, number 4721. Don't know where all the other 4,000 of those are, but they'll get there. Teets, The Final Fade, Sweaty Ray, Irish Goodbye, Dwayne McFarland, Farquad's Fantasy Flock, Mario Camara, Steve ATT, The Table Studios, Trey Avalon, and UFO Fantasy Football. And if you love fantasy football, you want to enjoy being part of a community where you know you belong, hit that subscribe button on the YouTube channel. We're trying to just get one more subscriber on this stream. Just one more. Could be you. Could be you. Want to shout out one more shout out our guy Don Flick, who has been a part of Whisper Nation since day one and just received a job at Pro Football Focus as a data analyst. So big shout out to our boy Donnie. But we saved the best for last year. Our special guest on the pod right now, Andrew Erickson from FantasyPros.
Woo!
Yeah, going wild right now. You can get his work over at fantasypros.com, following him on Twitter at Andrew Erickson _. We have all the links to his goodies down below. His work down below in the description. Andrew, what is good, man?
I thought this was just about to become a Manscaped ad for all that, where we were leading us to, but no, yeah. I'm doing fantastic, enjoying on a Thursday night. Nothing I'd rather do in the middle of June than talk about fantasy football, because that's where we're at this time. Fantasy football used to be a seasonal game. No, it's a 365. If you're not dialed into all the news and everything that's getting updated with training camp, OTAs, injuries, like, you're going to be behind the 8 ball. So I'm glad here. I'm happy and excited to chop it up with you guys.
Yeah, likewise, man. We're really excited. I mean, we were talking about this off air just a little bit ago. It's like with the free agency period, with the trades, everything that goes on in the NFL, it's king, man. Even during March Madness, the NFL is getting better ratings. It doesn't even have a product it's pushing out just because of these trades and stuff going on.
People on average watch the day one of the draft as much as they watch any NBA Finals game. It's just like,
that's where we're at, man. NFL is king. Let's go. So we want to get to know you a little bit better before we start the show here, Andrew. And so we got a couple rapid fire questions. We're going to fire them off right here for you. Do you root for your NFL team or your fantasy team more?
I root for my fantasy team probably more. I am a Patriots fan, so it hasn't been really hard because usually they both do good. So usually it hasn't been one or the other. But most of the time the Patriots are not a team that you want for fantasy. So it's, just root for my fantasy team. Patriots win. No biggie if not. I don't really have a lot of their players on my team, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, that's actually a good balance. It's a good team to balance that out with. You don't have to have a ton of Patriots right now. What year did you start playing fantasy football, Andrew?
2007. I shared a league with my dad, and it was like a family league, and it was the year that Brady threw 50 touchdowns. So it was a year that I remember very vaguely because we all made fun of my aunt because she drafted Tom Brady in the first round. We're like, oh, like, why you drafted a quarterback, like homer pick, and then he throws 50 touchdowns. It's like, okay.
Just looks silly for dogging her there, huh? Favorite fantasy football player of all time?
I'm going to go with T.O., Terrell Owens, from his days, whether it was in Dallas or I remember picking him up when he was on the Bengals. And it was like, dude, this guy is still like humming along. I picked him up at the waiver wire and he was still just producing. So yeah, T.O. for me.
How about favorite fantasy football team name?
Over the Dwayne Bowe. I think it's a classic. Nice. And Dwayne Bowe is like famously, he got pulled over and was like, hey, where is Taco Bell open? Like, that's like what he said. That's what he said to the cops. So Dwayne Bowe, shout out to him in his one season where he had like 15 touchdowns.
Yeah, the one season of glory with Matt Castle, I think it was. Yeah, that's amazing.
I love Wizard of Oz themed team names too. I love Lions, Tigers, and Bears. Oh my! If you've got a Lions, Tigers, or a Bengals player on there, that's pretty fun too.
That's a great one as well. What is a sound or noise you love, Andrew?
ESPN when you're on the clock.
Okay. Yeah, we like the on the clock sound for sure. Favorite swear word?
Fuck.
Yeah, of course.
That's the best one.
Undefeated. What are the most leagues you've played in at one time?
I think I'm in like 10 to 12. I think is probably the most I've been in, from Dynasty, Redraft, all the best ball, whatever.
Are you plan on keeping it that way, or you think you'll continue to grow that number
or shrink it?
Probably trying to cut back more, honestly, because it's just I can't, with my job as an analyst, trying to help other people. It's like I can barely set my own lineups, and then like Tuesday nights are like the worst night of the week. It's like, oh god, I gotta go through like friggin' 15 leagues of waivers. Like, all right, I'll talk to my fiance. I'll see you in like 3 hours. I can't hang out tonight because I gotta go pick up this scrub off the waiver wire.
Literally doing the thought process for every single league. I love that you're a man of the people. You're like, I'll sacrifice. I'm going to cut back because I need to help others. I mean, just such a giver there, Andrew. Most exciting fantasy football moment?
It happened a while back, but I remember sweating DST scoring on like a Monday Night Football in the Fantasy Football Championship, and it came down to like a 2-point conversion with Matt Ryan like throwing the ball, and it got intercepted, and it was like a pick 2, and it like just like totally converted. It was wild. I don't even remember the exact results, but when you have to watch DSTs and like pay attention to every single play, you'd be like, all right, does that affect it? Like, what's happening? So yeah, definitely that was
when you're counting like tackles and sacks, that's when it's like the real degen.
It wasn't a tackle for a loss. He crossed the line of scrimmage. He got right to it.
He did. He was not behind
the
rule book. Yeah, what is a tackle?
No, we took away removing points. That's fine.
Favorite, we actually in our league of record, Austin and I, we there was a Buffalo blocked punt for a touchdown, I think, in championship week, and it in 3 out of 4 leagues, big leagues that we knew, they counted it, but in sleeper they didn't, and so he lost when other people would have won in other leagues. Oh man!
The championship game by a separation of less than 2 points.
It was
we literally messaged Sleeper.
We used the TFW Twitter account to message them. They're like, no, we're not doing it. So all right, that's what it is. Favorite game day beverage, Andrew?
For me, it's H2O. I'm stone cold sober when I watch the games because I'm dialed in. Like, I want to make sure, by the time the games are all finished, that I know exactly what happened and I'm ready to report it. Monday morning, I'm up, I'm refreshed, and I'm ready to go. So for me, it's
lucid.
Water.
Love that.
Yeah, look, he wants less leagues. He doesn't want anything impairing his judgment. This guy is for you, Whisper Nation. Make sure we follow Andrew Erickson, please. Boneless or bone in on your wings?
I honestly don't care. I really could go either way. I don't really have a preference. I know that there's a lot of hate towards the people that don't like the boneless because they're like chicken tenders or nuggets or whatever. Yeah. I'm like, dude, like I just like chicken in general. It's like I don't eat the bones, so like why does it really matter? Like I'm just eating chicken.
Dude, best take so far on the boneless or bone in. I
don't eat the bones, yo. Like why you gotta stress
who does? Like you're cracking the bone, drinking the marrow.
I ate the bones.
Yeah, right. KFC. Kickoff is in 2 minutes, Andrew. You're still deciding your flex. Are you going to go with your gut or your own weekly rankings?
I'm going with the rankings. Trust the process. I look at them all week long, catering them, putting them together, and it's like if I just bail on them at the last second, it's like, well, why did I just spend the last week just doing these at all? So I stick to the rankings.
I feel that. Well, thank you so much, Andrew, for these questions. We love that Whisper Nation got to know you a little bit more. We are going to move into the news and notes, but before we do, we got to tell you a little bit about Mock Draft Marathon coming up in July.
Mock Draft Marathon. What is this? It's consecutive mock drafts for a total of 24 hours. Requires hours and even years of preparation.
Which is a little bit controversial, but...
Are you shitting me, Johnny?
I didn't plan that, I swear.
I can pretty much say 100% something that you really love to do.
Let the games begin.
Somebody came in and stole Johnny and they're hijacking his draft.
Oh, he's going to blame it on his 78-year-old neighbor.
Damn it, you guys snuck in a super flex. I knew it.
Ball is going to taste different than this meatball.
That's not that bad from a flex.
Outliers decide fantasy champions.
Stand out above the crowd. About the same set of 200 players, and it never gets old.
That's right, July 23rd and 24th, 24 straight hours on YouTube. Best way to know and see the action, get involved, hit that subscribe button on the YouTube channel now and help us continue to grow the brand. All right, we're going to move on to some news and notes. The first item of business here is Ezekiel Elliott. Cowboys coach Mike McCarthy believes Ezekiel Elliott is completely healthy now. Andrew, I'll start with you. Are we buying the supreme health of Ezekiel Elliott? I've actually heard that if you play through injury, some of the scar tissue doesn't heal as well. I think I've heard you be a little bit more out on Zeke. How are you feeling where his ADP is now?
I mean, I think that his ADP is fair where he is, but he's going in a range where I would rather just draft wide receivers. I don't think that Ezekiel Elliott, he can beat his ADP, as a mid-range RB2, maybe finish as a back-end RB1, but that doesn't move the needle for me. Like, he's not a difference maker anymore. He's honestly, like, it seems like it's an insult, but he's like kind of more in that like David Montgomery tier of where he's an RB2, he's really solid, he's going to probably play all the games. But at the end of the day, like, no one's going to be like, oh, Zeke, league winner. And that's what I want to get in the middle rounds.
I appreciate that. Dak Prescott, keeping with the Cowboys. Mike McCarthy said of Dak Prescott, he hopes he will have more rushing opportunities in 2022. Austin, when we were looking at Dak, he had ran a whole lot more earlier in his career. Then he had the ankle injury, and then coming back from that last year, he just didn't seem to run as much. With Amari Cooper gone, the target tree kind of narrows. Do you think do you buy this from Mike McCarthy that there'll be more rushing out of Dak this year?
I think they're going to need it. I think we're used to seeing a potent Dallas offense that has been littered with effective weapons that are looking a little bit different. As Andrew just pointed out about Zeke, who's been one of the best running backs in the league for at least a half a decade, is now slipping down to different tiers. We'll see how active Tony Pollard gets. We know he's good, but he's not like supreme or anything like that. CeeDee Lamb is awesome, but they're used to having 3 awesome wide receivers in Dallas. And now you've got Gallup, who's still hurt, Amari Cooper, who is gone. We're talking about Dalton Schultz now as a shinier piece. This is not the same Dallas Cowboys offense that we were salivating over the last couple of years. I think it's still going to be good, but I think you're going to need to make up some gaps from that lack of talent comparatively to where you've been in years past. So yeah, Dak being able to run a little bit more, going to get you a few more first downs, going to open up the field a little bit more. I am buying into this a little bit because I don't know if they're going to be able to continue producing unless they do.
Yeah, I think their offense will be high paced and stuff again. Like, obviously they'll throw and they'll be fast.
Want it to be.
Yeah, but last year they got into so many good positive game scripts for them. They could just run out the clock in the back half of games. I don't think it'll be that way this year, but we'll see. They still have an easy schedule. Moving on, Kyle Pitts hopes to improve pre-snap in 2022. Andrew, what's your overall temperature on Kyle Pitts here? Because obviously one touchdown last year, but he should be primed. I mean, this guy is just hitting every other efficiency metric off the chart.
Yeah, Kyle Pitts is one of the guys that I'm willing to almost break my rule of drafting players on good teams. Like, that's like kind of like my 5-word mantra where I'm just like, especially in the early rounds, I don't want to invest in bad offenses because that's where you hit landmines. Like, it's really easy to hit landmines on really bad offenses where you're over investing in a player. And Pitts is someone that I think that I will make an exception for because I think that he is uber talented. And I think that there is a opportunity for targets for him in the Falcons offense. He already showed us last year. I mean, as a rookie tight end, like what he did, even though from the fantasy perspective, it wasn't like amazing, but from a statistical standpoint, I mean, Kyle Pitts was off the charts necessarily as a rookie tight end. And he still should be the number one in that offense. And, I've been trying to finagle my way into convincing myself that, a combination of Mariota and Desmond Ridder can somehow make things work. And I guess the one positive thing that they could bring is, unlike Matt Ryan last year, who is a statue in the pocket, like he had no chance behind that offensive line. The Falcons offensive line is still not good, but the fact that Ridder and Mariota have some mobility to their game, it does lend itself to, okay, maybe these guys can create a little bit more off script than Matt Ryan could. And we've at least seen Mariota target a tight end and support a fantasy tight end and Delaney Walker in the past. So I'm starting to, and also you get the positional advantage with Kyle Pitts playing tight end. So it's a little bit different than like a receiver where there's a lot more options. Like we're limited with how many tight ends we could actually have, but Kyle Pitts entering his second season might be the best tight end in real life in the NFL. So that's not something I'm willing to just like totally disregard because, he's on the Falcons. I can't draft him. He's still someone that's really high in my consideration in that round 3, round 4.
Yeah, and he should have tons of touchdown or positive regression heading his way after last year, of course, as well. So sign me up for that. Pitt's a rookie last year. A rookie this year is Treylon Burks. Titans head coach Mike Vrabel reports that Treylon Burks is unavailable for Titans minicamp. So, Austin, I actually want both of you to speak on this. Austin, I'll start with you because now we continue to see these weird reports for Treylon every other week. He's got asthma. He's off the field. Like, it's becoming the, from the, is it the next Jamar Chase joke that he can't catch balls to like, okay, now I'm starting to get a little more concerned. Where's your concern level on Treylon Burks, Austin?
It's low right now, but it's on notice. I am paying attention to upcoming reports. It's at this point in the season, this is somebody who's coming in with some different medical issues. He's dealt with those his entire life. There's going to be some extra steps that he'll take to make sure that he's right. And whether it be asthma, sickle cell traits, and other players in the past, certain things have been done, and then those players have been extremely effective. So I'm not concerned, but my concern level is on notice.
Andrew, you kind of feel the same way, or are you really kind of getting a little scared on Burks here?
No, I mean, it's usually the other reports, usually guys are showing up in the best shape of their life. But in the regards of Treylon Burks, I mean, these guys have been, picked and poked at, prodded like over the last couple months, basically throughout the entire pre-draft process. And it's the fact that maybe the guy just took some time off and is just like, okay, maybe he's not in this elite shape that we want him to be. But, where is he at in August? Like the point of like these practices is to get better and to get into football shape. Like he's not going out tomorrow and playing in an NFL game. Like that's not happening. So I think that being put on notice and kind of paying attention to it, like in August, like we're seeing him in the preseason, he's like throwing up on the sidelines. Like, okay, like and that's like a reason to be like, okay, man, like we told you not to eat the bones and the chicken wings. Like, come on, like that wasn't the plan. So I think that, it's something to pay attention to, but right now it just seems like it's
beautiful.
Noise right now.
I ate the bones.
Yeah. So did Treylon Burks. All right, moving on. Josh Palmer. I know Andrew's probably going to like this. The Athletic's Daniel Popper reports that Chargers wide receiver Josh Palmer played with the first team offense during minicamp. Andrew, I kind of want to ask if we think that Palmer has all of the tools to not only be the contingency plan for Mike Williams or Keenan Allen, but also like that Tyler Boyd-esque like third wide receiver, that Russell Gage or AB in the past, not saying he's to that level, but we're going to have some offenses that are going to support three guys. Do you think Palmer can get there this year?
Yeah, I really do think that, Palmer was someone I liked a lot coming out of the college ranks, as someone that was a day 2 pick. It was not surprising to me. It surprised a lot of people that he went that high, but I liked him a lot. I liked his profile coming out as a guy that could command air yards down the field, could make big plays. And last year, he did exactly what he needed to do. When he got an opportunity, he delivered. He scored touchdowns, he made big plays, and he showed that he could separate and operate not only from the slot, but also on the outside. So whether it was Mike Williams or Keenan Allen that missed time, Josh Palmer showed that he could do more. And Justin Herbert's his quarterback. Like that's really as simple as it gets. Justin Herbert's his quarterback, and Jalen Guyton is just a guy. It's literally in his name, guy. Like that's
Jag-tag.
That's Jalen Guyton. So I think Palmer is someone. It's either going to be him or Gerald Everett that like has a lot of more value than is being represented or reflected by their ADP. Like everyone's convinced, obviously, Mike Williams and Keenan Allen are going to eat in this offense, but Herbert in a high flying offense can support more than 2 weapons. So I think that it's going to be either Palmer or Everett. So I'm glad to see the Palmers, operating with the first team already.
If you had to pick one, Everett or Palmer, who is it right now?
I would take Josh Palmer.
I think it's a little more exciting than a tight end usually if we can get a third wide receiver going. But yeah, I'm with you there. We'll move on to Terry McLaurin. Speaking Wednesday, Commanders head coach Ron Rivera stated we're not trading Terry McLaurin. Austin, do you believe Ron Rivera? And if he were traded, where would you want to see him go?
I don't really care if I believe him or not, and not to dismiss your question here, but I want to talk about the impact this has, I think, for Terry McLaurin. And I feel like Terry McLaurin has been driving down a road that has 2 diverging paths come up, and he is at this crossroads, and he's looking to his left and he's looking to his right. And on one side, he can be an above average, decent wide receiver. On the other path, he could be a superstar. And I think he's looking there and he's sitting and he's saying, who am I going to be? And I honestly like the fact that we're getting a little bit more pause on Terry McLaurin. I like that. I'm not a big fan of players holding out for contracts, but sometimes I think you do get dismissed and you got to stand up for yourself a little bit here. I haven't seen Terry McLaurin be an issue type player, and now is at a pivotal moment. And I'm just actually over the moon to hear Ron Rivera say, we're not trading Terry McLaurin. Like this means you like him, you want him on the team, or you're just gassing him up to trade him later. So to your question, who, if they did trade him, I mean, perennially, I'm going to go with my Packers over here. Love Christian Watson's future prospects. Not just because I drafted him in our dynasty rookie draft this year, but I think, Terry McLaurin and Aaron Rodgers could be awesome. That would be a really good fit. I would also like to see him. There's, I think, a lot of places that he could go because look at the quarterbacks that that Terry McLaurin has dealt with in the years past, and he's been in that wide receiver 2 area. It can't really get that much worse for Terry McLaurin, unless he went to like just a super loaded up wide receiver room. I wouldn't like to.
So yeah, loaded wide receiver room was shitty. Was shitty.
That wouldn't be great.
Yeah. I just had to bring in the grossness, of course. We'll move on to Odell Beckham Jr. In an interview with The Athletic, Rams Kevin Demoff said that the team is optimistic they can get a deal done with free agent Odell Beckham Jr. We've got a bunch of these wide receivers that could be coming on late, Andrew. We've got Gallup, we've got Godwin, OBJ, maybe the latest of them, obviously the rookie Jameson Williams. How are you approaching Odell Beckham without a team right now? And like, if he goes back to the Rams, let's say, where would you kind of have him?
It's tough to parse through because you have Allen Robinson kind of now added into the mix there with the Los Angeles Rams. You have Van Jefferson there. How are things going to play out with him potentially not even be available till like November? Like is he even going to be someone that we have in fantasy? Like, how great are you going to feel about starting him? I think that, like, from a best ball perspective, he's really interesting to take because a lot of these best ball tournaments are significantly more, like, the payout structure is very top heavy at week 17. So it's like if Beckham is playing on the Rams in week 17, like, you want part of that on your roster, especially because he's free right now. Like, you can get him in the 17th or 18th round because he's not on the team. But I think that it makes sense to kind of have the mindset that, okay, like, at the end of the day, he's probably going to be on a contender. So he's probably going to be on a good offense. And I think that's worth taking a shot on because what we saw, at least from the end of last year, he started to really turn it on. Basically, when he's not attached to Baker Mayfield, Odell Beckham Jr. is a really good wide receiver like we all thought he was. And it was just this, this mirage that Mayfield kind of put on with Beckham that just made us kind of think twice about it. But I think Beckham put that to rest with his play last year.
All right. Well, we will move on to Melvin Gordon, who said that he's ready to battle for the top spot in the Broncos backfield this season. Austin, you have Javonte Williams in Dynasty. A little bit of your heart died when the Denver Broncos, signed Melvin. No, I'm just kidding. But I wanted to say, like, when we look at this, there's almost like a case for Melvin Gordon to be like that poor man's James Conner of this year, like a guy that's getting really slept on an ADP that could really actually benefit a lot of teams that go and get him later on in drafts. How are you feeling when you look at the Broncos backfield?
Well, I'd agree that Melvin Gordon is a value right now. He was an RB2 last year, and he is being drafted as if he is not expected to be an RB2 again this year. We saw Javonte Williams' ADP spike up. I think he is overpriced at this point in time. I think Javonte Williams improves on his performance from last year, and I think Melvin Gordon slips a little from his last year, but not by a crazy margin. I think you end up seeing Javonte Williams be a higher-end RB2 when it's said and done, and Melvin Gordon be a back-end RB2, maybe an RB3. We'll see how the injuries shake out. But I think right now Melvin Gordon is a great value. He's got a lot of upside. I think he's in really good conditioning. He's in good health. And yeah, I'd get Melvin Gordon, get Javonte Williams if you can get it for a fair price.
We'll move on to our last bit of news here. Baker Mayfield. CBS Sports' Jonathan Jones reports that there's an urgency on Carolina's side to trade for Baker Mayfield soon. This feels like something that Cleveland leaked out so that they could get Carolina to trade for him. But, Andrew, when you look at this, does Baker Mayfield get you excited about DJ Moore, CMC, if he goes to Carolina?
I don't think it really matters for CMC. I think CMC's kind of shown us that, it doesn't really matter who's quarterback. But when he was the best fantasy scorer ever, he had horrible quarterbacks, and it didn't even really matter. So I don't think it affects him necessarily. If the offense is better, then awesome. Like, more scoring opportunities. I'll move CMC. I can't really move him where I have him ranked. So
right.
I would say, though, I think it is really good for DJ Moore because we have seen Mayfield fuel a wide receiver one season before. Like, we've had Jarvis Landry, or a fringe wide receiver one, excuse me. So, Jarvis Landry, looking at his seasons in 2018 and 2019, Jarvis Landry was wide receiver 19 and wide receiver 13 and half-point scoring. So, DJ Moore has never finished that high. Like, DJ Moore has been, like, as great as the guy is, you just look at how he's finished, and it's always wide receiver 2. And as long as he has terrible quarterbacks, it's never going to get past wide receiver 2. And there's value in that, to having a wide receiver 2, a steady commodity. But he should be so much more in a similar ilk to like a Terry McLaurin, where he can be a superstar. And I think with Mayfield, as long as they just don't develop whatever chemistry OBJ and Mayfield had, which was just so abnormal, I think that it is an upgrade for DJ Moore. Anything but Sam Darnold. Anything.
I want to bring in the football therapist's point also on this one, because I just have to connect some dots with Robbie Anderson in his late 20s, but in his 20s at the wide receiver position, mulling retirement, which I thought was a bit strange, but then thinking how 2 weeks or so before this mulling retirement, he was publicly posting, do not bring Baker over here, in different words of his, like, no, don't. It was very public. I was like, dude, you're going to see him at an event at some point, and it's going to be awkward. Like, so now the fact that he might be coming to the team, that's to me is almost like Robbie Anderson being like, I am now going to retire. The talks of Baker coming on board are intensifying, and I'm actually thinking of bowing out of this one. And so the further I see Baker from the Panthers, the more I see Robbie Anderson tightening up those cleats. I don't know if that's true or not, but I can't help but think it might be a little.
I think Robbie Anderson's a fine wide receiver, maybe even a little bit above average, whatever you want to call him. But I love that he's the guy throwing shade at like Sam Darnold and Baker Mayfield. It's like, that's you.
Who are you?
You're the wide receiver version of those guys. Like, please stop. I just think it's funny, but guys, ego is a funny thing. All right, we'll move on to Andrew Erickson's sleepers right now. If you want to find this awesome thread that we kind of got into that Andrew posted, that link is in the description below. So is his Twitter, and then to the actual article where a lot of this comes from behind the premium membership at FantasyPros. That link is there as well. You went through all 32 rosters. You wanted to identify a sleeper on each of those teams. And so we went through a few of the guys that you posted, and the first one I have to just be stoked on is Kadarius Toney, because I've been hyping him up myself as well. So we look at Kadarius Toney of the New York Giants, his ADP wide receiver 49. Andrew says he flashed future target magnet potential after posting 2.14 yards per route run. That was 11th, and commanding a 25% target rate per route run in 2021, tied for 7th best in the NFL in 2021. His 92nd percentile PFF receiving grade versus single coverage suggests that Toney can win wherever he lines up. I've been really on this Toney bandwagon, Andrew, as of late. I really do think he has that wide receiver one upside, like inside the top 12. My question is a two-parter. Do you agree that he has that top 12 upside? And his ADP currently around wide receiver 47. You mentioned 6 days ago 49. How high would he have to climb an ADP to make you feel uncomfortable in drafting him?
I mean, I think that for a top 12, I think it's probably slightly aggressive just because of the Giants offense. Like, that's the thing. Like, Daniel Jones is there, and I've talked about it already on this show, just talking about I want guys in good offenses. And right now, I'm not willing to say the Giants are going to be a good offense. I think they should be better. Like, they have to be better than they've been the last 2 years. But I can't come on here and say, Brian Daboll's going to fix literally everything. Daniel Jones is going to be the next coming of Josh Allen. Like, I'm not gonna say that. Like, they should improve, but I don't expect them to become now, a top 10 offense because they changed the coach. Again, personnel still matters. And right now, like, Daniel Jones is still a question mark. So with Toney, I would say top 12 is probably aggressive. And in terms of like his ADP, I think that once he becomes a player that you're drafting as like a starter, like if he's in the top 36, like I'm kind of feeling like, okay, like I have to start Kadarius Toney week 1. Like, that's a lot to ask, I feel like, because I just don't know how it's going to work out. Like, Toney could be, and that's kind of why I list him as like a sleeper, like breakout player, where I could see him becoming now, okay, he's the number 1 target in the Giants offense. He's electric. The talent, I think from a talent standpoint, I think he's probably the most talented receiver on the roster. But Wanda Robinson had a really great college pedigree. Kenny Golladay he's a proven asset. Like, he has done it at the NFL level and just totally tanked the last year because of how bad the offense was. So it's not like he's playing around with a bunch of scrubs, but there is an opportunity there for him to be a player. And when you just kind of look at him stylistically, compared to the Brian Daboll offense in Buffalo, he looks the most like Diggs. Like, he profiles most like Diggs. Golladay would be Gabriel Davis, and you have Wanda Robinson filling in as like the Cole Beasley role. So of those 3 roles, Diggs is obviously the one that you want for fantasy, which is why if I have to pick one of these Giants receivers to like hope that is the breakout guy, I would go with Kadarius Toney.
You still like Kenny G though too, because he's even more of a value at this point.
Yeah, I think that I don't want to write off Kenny Golladay after just how horrible the quarterback play was last year, and like I mentioned before, like he's done it before. Like, this guy has double-digit touchdown upside because he's a red zone monster, and last year they just like didn't throw him the ball in the red zone. It was horrible. for him last year. But no, yeah, if Toney gets taken, I don't have any problem taking Galladay, a round or two later.
I like Steph Smalls, who came on our program a few weeks back, huge Giants fan. And she's like, I think the fantasy football community has forgot that there are wide receivers in New York and they actually will throw the ball. Like, it's going to happen. Someone will catch it. Like, I know, weird, but it will happen.
Well, yeah. And it's like the logic says, like, I know we want guys on good teams as Andrew was saying, but the logic says that they're going to have to throw a lot because they're going to be a bad team. So, like, if we can get that narrowed down target wise, then we should like one of those guys, if not two. All right, moving on to Allan Lazard of the Green Bay Packers. His current ADP is wide receiver 48. Andrew lays this out on Twitter, says Aaron Rodgers trusts Lazard after they have spent the last 4 seasons together, and their chemistry was on full display over the final 5 weeks of the 2021 regular season. Lazard was the wide receiver 8 in PPR scoring on the back of 21 receptions for 290 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns. Someone on Green Bay will have to replace Devontae Adams' elite red zone production, and Lazard looks to fit the mold at 6'5". Andrew, as a Packers fan, I should probably recuse myself or at least try and play like devil's advocate on Lazard, but he had his best yards per route run posting, 1.77. That came 2 years ago. And some could actually argue that maybe Lazard just isn't that good, more of like a role player. What would your counterpoint to that be? I know you laid some of this out already.
Yeah, I think that I would agree with that. I don't think Lazard is some like Kadarius Toney level talent. And really, I think that's why when you look at sleepers, I think it's important to like denote like what you're describing the sleeper as. Like Lazard to me is like a value, whereas Kadarius Toney is a potential breakout. So that's kind of the difference where I think if you draft Lazard as, the wide receiver 45 where he's going, like he's going to definitely beat that ADP. Like you're going to feel much better about starting him week to week if he ends up becoming that lead receiver for Aaron Rodgers, which, I mean, look, Aaron Rodgers is a veteran quarterback that needs trust. Like it takes so long for these guys to develop. We saw Devontae Adams. It took 3 years for them to finally kind of start to click and to start to mesh. And it just takes time with some of these older quarterbacks to gain the trust. And he has Allan Lazard's trust. So even if Lazard isn't this alpha, wide receiver with this, so much talent, Aaron Rodgers is going to give him opportunities to put up fantasy points. And, throughout his career, he's had bursts and spurts where he has done so. Like I mentioned, like at the tail end of last season. So I think that Lazard, and someone that kind of reminds me of Lazard last year that I basically just like wrote off. Like I was like, this guy, he sucks. Like he can't do anything, was Russell Gage. I was like, Russell Gage, he's not good. Like he's not efficient. He was like one of the more inefficient players. And I didn't open my mind to the possibilities that, hey man, this guy's 25 years old, 26 years old. You can still improve. Like you can get better. And when you have Aaron Rodgers as your quarterback, like that's your ticket to getting better. So I think that Lazard could have a Russell Gage-esque type of season where he is really productive. And we look back at him, we're like, wow, like Allan Lazard was like really good through this, like these stretch of weeks. So yeah, that's why I like Lazard as a really good value.
I feel like every week we can look at Aaron Rodgers and psychoanalyze. It's like, oh, he's got trust issues, commitment issues, vaccine issues. Like, yeah, what a head case.
Got some issues, man.
Yeah,
love him.
Definitely. People are going to people, as my buddy Austin says there. All right, moving on to the Chicago Bears. Cole Kmet. Andrew, you say he's the easiest tight end breakout to call in all of fantasy football. His ADP is tight end 15. Kmet's 8th-ranked route participation and 7th-ranked target share, 17%, from 2021 hardly align with his fantasy production. No tight end finished with more fantasy points under expectation, negative 36.6, than Notre Dame product Cole Kmet. That designation is a sign of Kmet that he is due for a fantasy breakout. It signaled as much for guys like Zach Ertz and Dawson Knox, who scored fewer points than expected in 2020 before contributing in fantasy this past year. Both tight ends finished 2021 as a top 10 option in points per game. In addition, he has the requisite size and athleticism, supporting an 87th percentile height, 88th percentile vertical jump, and 89th percentile broad jump. Kmet checks off all the boxes for a tight end breakout, and that's exactly why Andrew, have him ranked 4 spots ahead of ADP. So I guess my question for you, Andrew, on this was, do you think there's a case to take guys with a better environment, maybe QB, ahead of him, say like Irv Smith or Robert Tonyan? We just got done talking about the Packers a little bit. Or do you think his necessity to his offense, given what they haven't done in Chicago, gives him the clear edge over those guys?
I think in the range where you have to take, because we're talking about late round tight ends at this point. Like this is where you're looking at. So I'm willing to take a guy that has the role that could turn into a top 5 tight end. Like Robert Tonyan, the only way he's going to become a top 5 tight end if he scores 12 touchdowns, like basically what he did 2 years ago. And that's definitely still in his range of outcomes, similar with Irv Smith. But Cole Kmet, his role on this offense as the clear-cut tight end 1 is so clear. And the only reason last year he wasn't able to really get anything done from his role was because Jimmy Graham was always out there, in the red zone stealing touchdowns. And that's why Cole Kmet can really never get over the hump. And you mentioned offensive environment. I think Justin Fields is a good quarterback. Like, I don't know why that's become like suddenly a hot take because the Bears didn't draft a bunch of wide receivers or sign a bunch of free agent receivers, even though they have Darnell Mooney and they have Cole Kmet. And it reminds me a lot of a certain other mobile quarterback that got a lot of criticism. Going into his second year, Lamar Jackson, he had Marquise Brown and Mark Andrews. Those were his top 2 options. And what happened? Oh, he won MVP. So I just
there you
think
go. Justin Fields wins MVP, says Andrew Erickson.
Hey, man, the crazier things have happened. I'll say that much. But I think that Kmet is, entering his 3rd year, and he has a opportunity for targets. That's the biggest thing with these tight end breakouts is you have to have an opportunity to get targets in your offense. And Cole Kmet has that because it's just Darnell Mooney and some 25-year-old guy that they thought they drafted that they thought was a good pick. So I'm going with Cole Kmet.
I'm with you there. I like Kmet's upside for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Moving on to Rhamondre Stevenson of the New England Patriots. Andrew lays out that he experienced a very successful rookie season that should not be overlooked. After fully escaping the Belichick doghouse in Week 9, Stevenson earned top grades across the board. He was PFF's 3rd highest graded running back at 84.2. Additionally, he ranked 13th in rushing yards and yards per route run at 1.41. For fantasy, the rookie running back was the RB25 in total points scored, 8 spots behind his backfield teammate Damian Harris. Stevenson and Harris split touches nearly 50-50 in the team's remaining games. In the 6 games together, Stevenson slightly edged out Harris in expected fantasy points per game, 9.3 versus 8.9. There's a high ceiling for Stevenson, says Andrew. If you ask former Patriots linebacker Rob Ninkovich, the ESPN analyst said that Stevenson, quote, will be one of the better, if not one of the top 3 running backs in the league, based on what I saw with his strength, explosion, and catch and run ability. So Andrew says, with the rumors coming out of Foxborough that Stevenson is a dark horse to see an expanded role on 3rd downs, with James White returning from the injury, the second-year back needs to be a priority target as the draft slips into the double-digit rounds.
So I love this breakdown. I like Rhamondre a lot myself. The problem when I have a rule, you talk about, you write down your mantras. I have a notebook I keep notes in as well. And in that section of notes, probably from 3 or 4 years ago, it was just don't draft a New England running back. Well, spoiler alert, I draft New England running backs every year because I'm always like, it will work out. These guys are good. It's going to be a run-heavy team. And we like to talk about the unpredictable Bellatrix in this industry. And Travis and I talk about how Bellatrix are actually fairly predictable. There's going to be a lot of stable backs, all with their semi-unique roles, who are going to get more utilization depending on the matchup. And based on the matchups, you kind of do have a decent idea of which back will be utilized the most in that game. Now, it's fine for week to weeks, but it makes the overall predictions from where I'm looking at it a little bit tough. So do you agree with this overall overview of the Bellatrix? And if so, how should we approach this New England backfield, knowing that Rhamondre, but as well as some others, are legit good running backs who are all going to get time?
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. Talking about how Belichick plays the matchups with certain players, you can see it by the way that they have guys active on game day, depending on, all right, we're going to have a run heavy approach. Like we're going to have Stevenson active. They did it last year, kind of cycling through Stevenson and he was inactive. Then they had JJ Taylor, he would be active for certain games. But then ultimately whatever happens, if someone puts the ball on the ground, you're going to be inactive the next week. So the fumbles usually kind of solve everything because they just basically are the chopping block of running backs in the backfield. It's like, all right, well, you fumbled, you're gone. Welcome to the doghouse. So Rhamondre was in the doghouse during the beginning of last year. and he was able to get out of it. Like, that in itself was an accomplishment, especially for a rookie running back, which the Patriots hardly ever feature. When you look back at historically with Belichick, it's really only been the first round picks that basically have to play because of where they're drafted, like Lawrence Maroney and Sony Michel. Like, Romandre Stevenson was a day 3 pick, and he managed to not only get on the field, but carve out a near 50-50 role in the second half of the season. So, the Rob Ninkovich quote really stuck out to me because he wasn't even talking about like best running back on the Patriots, like best running back in the league. And when you look at his, the second half of last season, it's hard to argue with, like, Stevenson was one of the best running backs in the league at the end of last season. Like, from a receiving standpoint, from a rushing standpoint, he was off the charts. And I think that I almost just prefer drafting Stevenson instead of Harris, because if I draft Harris, in my mind, I'm going to view him as a starter. And I'm like, all right, I need to start this guy every week. Whereas Rhamondre, I'm drafting as a depth piece, and then I'm just waiting for him to, assert himself to become the number 1 runner in this backfield. Or if a Damien Harris injury happens, because if that does occur, Damien Harris has been banged up. Rhamondre has a 3-down skill set, which we just haven't seen from Damien Harris. We haven't seen Damien Harris get involved more in the receiving game, where Stevenson did it as a rookie, which is just really rare to find. So I think that Stevenson, and I was originally on Damien Harris earlier in the offseason, so I've kind of shifted gears a little bit. Stevenson is honestly just like a really cheap version of A.J. Dillon. Like, it would not surprise me whatsoever to be talking about A.J. Dillon or talking about Stevenson next year. And we're talking about a guy that, if Damien Harris, comes back to the Patriots, we're talking about Damien Harris as like a 6th-round pick, and Rhamondre is a 7th-round pick, like right behind him, if he's not already the lead bell cow for the Patriots. So I think that the fact that they drafted other running backs doesn't really move the needle for me. I don't think those guys are going to be involved. Like, Rhamondre being involved as a rookie was such a rare feat. Like, Kevin Harris, Pierre Strong, I think that I like their profiles. I was glad the Patriots drafted them as like a fan, but I don't expect anything from them in year 1. I really think it's going to be Damien Harris and Stevenson. And like you had alluded to, Stevenson might just be the better running back.
Well, and like you mentioned it there with Harris and like their ability to kind of almost force. I mean, Rhamondre had missed blocks and fumbled. Like, that's usually like you'll get cut for that stuff. Yeah. Like with Belichick, but you said it, like they kind of forced played him there. So I can hear these Damien Harris stands right now being like, hey, he's in contract year. He was good last year. A lot of it was touchdown dependent, but do you see New England just pounding him into the ground, or do you actually think that Stevenson could possibly be that much better that they're just going to have to throw him on the field?
It could definitely work in both ways, where, maybe they pound Damien Harris to start the year, and maybe Stevenson is really not involved at all. And then what do? Oh, you see him hit the waiver wire, and then you stash him. Like that's the play there. And, don't forget that last year, Sony Michel was in a contract year. What happened to him? Oh, he got traded to a team that lost their running back. You don't think that Damien Harris could be a potential trade candidate, that the Patriots, hey, we have so many running backs now, like, let's trade Damien Harris. Oh, Josh Jacobs is going to hold out. Oh, Josh McDaniels, you want Damien Harris? Oh, you can take him. You give us a 3rd-round pick. Like, there are so many scenarios where Damien Harris gets moved. They use him up, in the beginning of the season, and then when it really matters, they turn the ball to Rhamondre Stevenson, because Harris has always operated as a committee back. Like, he's never been the featured guy, where Stevenson showed us last year that he could really take on that role. So, yeah, right now for me, like, based on just ADPs that I've seen, Harris is going usually just way too far, where, I mean, week 1, we could see a 50-50 split, and we could see Stevenson play more on 3rd downs. And it's like, okay, so what am I getting out of Damien Harris? Like, you need touchdowns from Harris, and that's what we got last year. And it's just hard to bank on them happening year over year, especially with Stevenson, he's going to get touches in this offense.
Yeah.
I think the interesting thing will be to watch James White's health. So, like, if we get through the summer and James White it's still murky, then I'll start to believe some of these things of Rhamondre picking up the receiving. Like, I know he can catch, but it's just about, like, if James White's healthy, they're going to give James White the James White role for sure. But, like, we have questions about that. So we'll just kind of see how that plays out. Moving on to another, kind of wide receiver, or another room that we have questions about, the Kansas City wide receiver room. But, Andrew, you're making the case for MVS here, being drafted in best ball ADP at wide receiver 54, just less than a day after trading Tyreek Hill to the Miami Dolphins. The Chiefs then signed MVS to help him replace the big play production. He is a former ex-Packer, and he is a field stretcher. He ranked inside the top 5 in yards per reception over the last 2 seasons, so he will feel right at home catching bombs from Patrick Mahomes. He is sure to experience spiked weeks of production attached to the Chiefs' big arm quarterback, but valuing him more than a weekly boomer bust wide receiver 3/4 would be malpractice. MVS does get a bump in the rankings with a slight upgrade at QB and the opportunity to see larger target share, but I wouldn't view him too dissimilarly to how he was perceived in Green Bay for the past 4 seasons. He has never commanded 75 targets in a season. However, MVS will have an advantage fighting for reps as a starting perimeter wide receiver, with most Chiefs receivers vying for snaps from the slot between Juju Smith-Schuster, Sky Moore, and Mecole Hardman. I like him the most at cost among Chiefs wide receivers.
I like him a lot at the cost as well, Andrew. And I've heard a lot, though, in the industry talking about who's going to fill the Tyreek Hill opportunity and those vacated targets. And I'm wondering if you think anybody outside of Kelce, because we know what Kelce is about, but does anybody outside of Travis Kelce emerge as an actual piece, consistent piece for your team? Or in Kansas City, do we end up with more of a carousel of wide receivers throughout the year, similar to how we had in Kansas City outside of Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce? Like, who's going to be that third wide receiving option? Some weeks it was Mecole, some weeks it was Byron Pringle. Maybe you get Robinson has a game that pops off. Do you think we actually get a number 2 wide receiver, or do we have a lot of receivers who have good weeks here and there, but it's a bit inconsistent on which one it is?
I think I've been more open to the idea that it's going to be a committee approach, like with the receivers, where it's a different guy every single week. Like you're playing matchups every single week with these Chiefs receivers, like you had mentioned before. And it kind of reminds me of like when you go back to I was doing a lot of Andy Reid research, just trying to figure out, what he did after he lost, Terrell Owens, like what happened after he lost T.O. And basically it was kind of like spreading the wealth. Like he would always have one guy kind of be the main target, which in this case is Travis Kelce. But for the most part, there were a lot of seasons with him and McNabb where they were just playing with like nobody at receiver. Kevin Curtis was a name that I brought up from some guy had 1,000 yards receiving who had never heard of that was on the Eagles because he just kind of was that guy that year. But he wasn't any, uber talent in any way, shape, or form. So the Eagles have done this before where, Brian Westbrook has been their number 1 wide receiver, for Andy Reid. And we have question marks about, who's the running back going to be catching passes from Patrick Mahomes. I mean, they have a lot of depth, I guess I would say. And I think that the fact that they didn't want to pay one receiver the Tyreek Hill money is their version of, okay, how are we going to make up Tyreek Hill's production with 5 different guys? Like that's going to be the way we're going to do it, not necessarily with one guy taking on his production. And for me, with MVS, it's just so clear what his role will be in this offense where everyone else is like, I don't know, like who's starting, like who's in the starting lineup. I feel confident that it's going to be MVS in the starting lineup based on the salary that they gave him and the fact that his skill set as the vertical burner down the field on the outside is so unique to the other receivers. So I feel confident that he's going to be on the field most of the time. Week 1 against the Arizona Cardinals, I know who's going to be out there. It's going to be MVS, and he's probably going to have a big game. And Mahomes has a great deep ball. And I know that they kind of went away from that a little bit last year with teams trying to, coax them into throwing the ball more underneath, and that's going to happen. That's going to make MVS more boom or bust. But at this range where you're drafting receivers, I can get Patrick Mahomes, deep threat, who has been Tyreek Hill for the past, 4 or 5 years. Now I can get him outside the top 40 wide receivers. Yeah, sign me up for that.
Yeah, I mean, we asked the question in the chat and Whisper Nation giving us all different answers. This is one of those questions me and Austin were talking. We're just going to be talking about it all summer long. Which guys are going to be? I think their ADPs are like we're seeing Juju get steamed up now. I think we'll see if Sky Moore can get back healthy. He'll get, some robust ADP action as well. So going to be an interesting one that we'll dissect all summer long. Excited for it. Andrew Erickson, those were the sleepers. Remember, the thread is in the description, so you guys can go check it out or go to fantasypros.com. But we had a couple more tweets you had that we just thought were good to talk about here. And one of them was about Breece Hall, who you called a hero RB disguised as a dead zone RB.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk about what the dead zone is. And it's, red rounds 3 through 5 we've talked about, but this is a fluid paradigm. And to me, the dead zone is when we start drafting running backs that we think are going to be productive, albeit sexy, but heavily used running backs for your fantasy team, like a Mike Davis in 2021 or a David Johnson with the Texans, where you're thinking you've got an RB2 with upside based on opportunity when you've really got like an RB4 with limited upside based on the lack of talent or juice left in the tank. But I wanted to know from you, Andrew, how do you view the dead zone? Is it fluid? What metrics are you considering when you talk about the dead zone?
Yeah, the dead zone to me is the running back tier that has problems. Because if you are a bell cow running back that has elite upside, you're going in the top 2 rounds. Like the market is way too, like, you don't see stud running backs fall into round 3. And the reason why those running backs are available in those rounds and not later on like they should be is because the scarcity of the position. It's like, oh my God, like I don't have a running back. Like they get pushed up naturally because of the position they play, but they fall behind the top tier guys because they all have issues. Like, and it's not hard to point out the issues that these guys have. Looking at some of the running backs last year or even this year, David Montgomery's kind of like the face of the dead zone. He plays on a bad offense. Like there's question marks about, how good is David Montgomery? And, when it's all said and done, okay, he becomes an RB2, but more often than not, that doesn't actually end up moving the needle for you. But you just see the landmines, as you'll kind of get into here, like Chris Carson, James Robinson, just guys that, you were kind of like holding on to hope that they can reproduce, the production that they once had. They're really there because of what they've done and not necessarily what they're going to do.
I like that a lot. That makes a lot of sense. It's almost like a floor play. I always ask the question, what's the value over replacement? And with the running backs you're talking about, it's like there really isn't a lot of value over the replacement. And the replacement could be a dude you found on the waiver wire, like if you're in a redraft and a third down back who, has got a chance to catch a couple passes and take him deep. Like you might have better luck starting that running back than you do this other guy who's you think is getting work, like a David Montgomery who plays for a bad team. And
I think that a great litmus test is to kind of like figure out, like, if you're in the dead zone or you're looking at a dead zone running back, is to kind of ask yourself, all right, if this starting running back gets hurt, where am I going to rank his backup? On a good offense, and Alexander Madison's in the lineup, for Dalvin Cook or whatever. Are you ranking Alexander Madison over Dave Montgomery? Yep. Dave Montgomery's a dead zone. Like are you ranking him over Zeke? Yep. All right, Zeke's a dead zone running back. Like kind of like asking yourself,
if he was the starter.
Yeah, like if there was a backup running back that became a starter, because I wouldn't put Madison ahead of CMC because CMC has established himself as such an alpha. But it's that kind of borderline where you're willing to rank literally Joe Schmo over this running back going in this zone because that's really what we're looking at. Like, that's what we're kind of comparing to. And it's like, if a guy with opportunity could just beat all these other running backs, then why am I drafting these running backs in the first place?
I think it's a great litmus test. Yeah,
you were mentioning some of the guys last year. We had the whole list here, but like if you look at like some of the bad names, like Mike Davis, obviously, Chris Carson, Gus Edwards, that was an injury and stuff. Chase Edmonds kind of underperformed. We look at the names in this year, and there were good ones last year too, but Saquon Barkley, Dave Montgomery, Gibson, Zeke, Cam Akers, James Conner, J.K. Dobbins, Elijah Mitchell, Travis Etienne. You mentioned Breece Hall, CEH, Josh Jacobs. I mean, do you think this year has a chance to like kind of buck the notion of dead zone, change the perception of what we're talking about? But if not, like, what are your favorites to beat the dead zone this year, Andrew?
I mean, I think that you're always going to see some guys, get out of the dead zone, because they're just not necessarily priced accurately. It's like looking at players like a DeAndre Swift, where, maybe DeAndre Swift should have been a second-round pick last year. Maybe he shouldn't have been going in the dead zone. It's kind of finding guys like that that fit a profile that isn't really like the others. For me, looking at the quick list here, guys that I think that could probably escape the dead zone, Saquon Barkley, Cam Akers, Travis Etienne, and Breece Hall are kind of the guys that I kind of gravitate towards. And even James Conner, I've kind of had a differing opinion on. James Conner is kind of high on, to start the offseason, but then I was really kind of thinking about it more, and I was really boosting his projection based on the 5-6 game sample without Chase Edmonds, when I'm doing exactly what creates the dead zone as an issue, is you're projecting this workload that's probably not actually there for a otherwise replaceable running back. James Conner has been good, but it's been in certain spurts. He's been given opportunities because of injuries, and it's like James Conner probably is not going to get that same type of workload. I looked at his first half of the year because I was just trying to like investigate my own ranking of him, and he had more rushing touchdowns than he had catches through the first 9 weeks of the season. He had 5 catches and he had 8 rushing touchdowns. And I'm like, wow,
shit.
like that is like a number that I did not think was possible. And, that's what was kind of stabilizing him when Chase Edmonds was there, was all the rushing touchdown production he was getting. And is it crazy to think that a combination of Eno Benjamin and Darrell Williams could just take on the Chase Edmonds role? Like, that's not that outlandish. And now I feel like I need to lower my stance a little bit on James Conner and kind of view him more as one of these dead zone backs because he really fits more of that profile. Whereas guys like ETN, Breece Hall, they're in the dead zone because they are just unknowns at this point. Like they're not there because we feel like we have to put them there. We put them there because they can't go into the elite tier because they haven't done anything yet, but that's why they just have to move down one tier. But
kind of like how you framed Andrew earlier, the dead zone guys are guys who have done it in the past, not necessarily going to do it. So guys that we haven't seen do it at all, we can't put them in that group.
Right. It's almost like with Breece Hall and Travis Etienne, like their range of outcomes is more like next year we're going to be talking about them as round top 2 picks in the first 2 rounds, or we're going to be talking about them as like round 8 picks. Like, outside the dead zone totally because they didn't fire, they became, one-dimensional, et cetera, something along those lines. But we have to put them in this range because that's where they go as unproven, unknown commodities. But these are the guys that usually emerge, like guys that have pass-catching profiles, guys that are young, and that's kind of why I think that players like a Saquon Barkley, he's still 25. Like, he's still super young. And I know it's been a while since he's done anything, but when he did do it, it was number 1 running back in the league. So even when guys like, David Montgomery, Antonio Gibson put up, these back-end fantasy 1 numbers, like it's like RB12. Like, and we say that's okay, it's a fantasy RB1, but like we know that a RB1 overall is so much different than what RB12 is. Like it's not even really in the same range, but we just kind of throw it together as, RB1. So I think that Saquon, especially with the Giants making upgrades across the board, he's fully healthy. I think that this is a year to be in on Saquon and to take the discount on him because you're getting the injury discount. We have injuries happen to all of these top guys, especially in the top 2 rounds. Now Saquon's falling into round 3, and you're saying that I can get a guy that has the possibility of catching 90 passes in a season. So we talked about the Giants receivers earlier. Who's the most proven player on the Giants offense overall? I would argue that it's probably Saquon Barkley. So if he's the best player on an improving offense Saquon Barkley had 13 red zone touches last year. 13. That's like impossible for a starting running back to have. Devontae Booker had more than him. Carlos Hyde had more red zone touches than Saquon Barkley did. Just like absolutely ludicrous numbers. And that was something that I picked up when I was looking at Austin Eckler. I was looking at Eckler, going into last year's, like, what could I have looked at Eckler and his profile? Okay, great receiver, but he took a step forward last year because he scored 20 touchdowns, because he had red zone usage. And if Barkley stays healthy, he's going to be the red zone guy for the Giants. And if the Giants offense is better, he should have more opportunity to score touchdowns. So Barkley, I really think that he's a guy that I'm in on Barkley this year.
You mentioned Barkley there, and you mentioned DeAndre Swift maybe should have been drafted higher last year. I think Saquon is a guy that's going to end up like raising through the summer. As long as he stays healthy, I think some of that hype will come up. Man, you had a ton of knowledge there. I just want to shout out that whole segment is really awesome to talk about RBs. Really what got me, though, was talking about the difference between RB12 and RB1. It's like your top 5 RBs, they fuck hard, but like your 6 through 12, you're kind of like, you're like the anxiety you get every week. You're like, he's an RB1. Like Zeke last year was an RB1, but like, did you feel good about your RB1 Zeke last year?
Didn't fuck so hard.
Yeah.
So just not as hard.
No, not as hard. No. All right. Moving on to Big Mike Williams here. Andrew, you said on Twitter that the sky is the limit for the Chargers offense, and the production from touchdowns could easily vault Williams over Keenan Allen in fantasy across all formats, despite the latter's higher projected target share. Williams has commanded 40 end zone targets since 2019. He has converted them into 8 touchdowns, 5 of which came last season. He finished 6th in end zone targets with 16, but caught only 5 for touchdowns. With positive touchdown regression set on the horizon and a resume that features a double-digit touchdown season, Williams appears primed for 10-plus touchdowns in 2022 and to repeat his wide receiver 12 finish. Williams posted highs in targets, target share, receptions, and yards per route run. Through the first 5 weeks of the season, the big-bodied wideout was the second in wide receiver scoring behind only Cooper Kupp. Big Mike finished the season as the wide receiver 23 in fantasy points per game, despite cooling off considerably in the later weeks, in addition to leaving a boatload of touchdown production on the table.
Love Mike Williams. Have always loved Mike Williams. The question I'm asking you is the same one I end up asking every single year. Is there anything in the way of Mike Williams other than his own health?
No, I really don't think so. Mike Williams, it's funny. We played Family Feud on the Fantasy Pros football podcast. And the first question was, who is the most boom or bust wide receiver? My number one answer, Mike Williams. That is correct, Andrew, for 10 points. Because that's the deal with Mike Williams. He either scores like 50 points or literally doesn't do anything and gets hurt. But the fact of the matter that his role changed last year in a new offense, he was featured more as a actual full receiver receiving a full route tree. He wasn't just viewed as the team's deep threat. Like he was doing more as an actual X wide receiver. We were playing as a complement more to Keenan Allen instead of just like opening things up for Keenan Allen underneath. So I think Mike Williams, I think that the health, if he can stay healthy, Mike Williams has the prototypical size and speed to be he's an alpha X receiver. Like that's what his build is like. And when you're attached to guys like Justin, that's why I like betting on guys that are just attached to good quarterback. Justin Herbert is so good. He's phenomenal. And Mike Williams is so overdue to catch like 15 touchdowns. Like the guy can only see so many end zone targets and not score touchdowns. It can't keep up at this rate. So we talk about, I mentioned Austin Eckler, scored 20 touchdowns last year. Is that going to happen again? Probably not. And part of the reason he did score so many touchdowns is because Mike Williams wasn't converting on the touchdown opportunities he was getting last year. I wouldn't bet on that happening twice. So for me, it's like Mike Williams is that low-hanging fruit of the player that could not only be the touchdown leader on the Chargers, but lead the NFL overall in touchdowns.
Yeah, I hear that.
A ton of upside with BMW. I feel like we've all been burned just waiting for him to hit his actual ceiling. He did kind of flash it last year, like you said, in that first part of the year. But yeah, it's all about the health for him. But really pumped on them. All right, you've been a nice guy the whole show here, Andrew. But we got to get a little bit of like a shade take in here, and so we pulled
the last one here.
Yeah, you got to bring it home. We saved the best for last, I guess. But we'll talk about Dawson Knox here, who you talked about on Twitter. You said, considering Knox is being drafted in the middle range of tight ends, tight end 9, that typically have poor ROIs compared to guys going later because the production is so close, the Bills tight end remains hands-off at his current draft price. Knox's target rate per route run ranked last among any tight end that commanded 50 targets last season. Woof. Jamison Crowder is still a viable target, and Gabe Davis looks poised for a breakout. That is a problem for Knox. Dawson Knox has major red flags on his profile, from his impending touchdown regression to super low target rate per route run. So any role that newcomer O.J. Howard potentially earns coming in is a massive problem.
Diggs is great over there in Buffalo, as we know. And now we're talking about the second option for Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills. Gabe Davis's ADP is climbing quick. Knox has major question marks, as you've mentioned here, and he's not really that cheap, Dawson Knox. Crowder is legitimately good, and Cook was known as a pass catcher, and they went out and drafted him. My question is similar to the question I had with Kansas City. Do we actually have a number 2 option here in Buffalo after Diggs? And are any of these options of value, or are they overpriced fallacies where they're currently at?
Well, you're going to have to pay for him. Like that's the big thing. And I think you hit on that. No one's sleeping on the Bills offense, really. Like people know that it's elite and that they throw the ball more than basically any other offense not named the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Tom Brady. So you got to pay up for them. But in the case of Gabriel Davis specifically, like I believe in the breakout with Gabriel Davis as a player that hasn't even played a full-time role in this offense. And when he did last year, he was averaging nearly 20 fantasy points per game. I think that those that are looking to kind of fade Gabriel Davis I think you're just overthinking it. You're looking at, well, he's not hitting X threshold, because he wasn't playing. Like he wasn't on the field. Like the Bills have shown us that they are willing to play these veteran players over young athletes, even when they flash. They do it all the time. But now it's pretty clear that Gabriel Davis has earned the right to be the number 2 receiver opposite Stefon Diggs, while they have a rotating cast and carousel of players operating from the slot. And Gabriel Davis And every time he's gotten on the field, he's made plays. Like, he's top 5 in yards per reception over the last 2 seasons. He's top 5 in end zone targets overall, like with like DK Metcalf and Mike Evans and Stefon Diggs. And the guy has played like as a starter in like 6 games. So for me, I just am so tantalized by his massive upside as a player that can command touchdowns. And I just don't think it's that outlandish to think that a guy entering year 3 is going to finally come into his own. And if I have to bet on a guy attached to Josh Allen to break out, and that's crazy, well then, call me crazy, guys.
I guess I like fantasy points. What a coincidence. Yeah. I'm with it. I think Knox, I accidentally drafted Knox on our mock draft on Monday, and I was just like so upset because I wanted Dalton Schultz, and I didn't realize he was gone. And the D, whatever. It doesn't matter because it's in June, and it doesn't matter anyways.
The D.
Yeah, exactly. You know, just a sucker for the D. So that's the way it goes. Andrew, we appreciate you so much being on the pod, man, on the show here. We appreciate it. Tell the people where they can find you and kind of what you're working on right now.
Yeah, so I am on Twitter at Andrew Erickson _. Also the same handle on TikTok as I try to incorporate the fantasy football minds on the TikTok sphere. Get the kids in on it. You know, they deserve to have some good they deserve to have some good analysis too. Yeah. And right now what I'm working on is actually a big article just kind of highlighting something I've mentioned a lot here. My mantra, you know, draft guys and good offenses. You know, looking at the top 12 offenses and almost kind of falling and identifying potential values where how do I get exposure to all of these top offenses at the right cost? You know, maybe I don't need to draft A.J. Brown in round 3. Oh, how do you get exposure to A.J. Brown? You draft Jalen Hurts in round 6 or 7. Like, so when A.J. Brown scores touchdowns, you're still benefiting from it because you have Jalen Hurts, but you didn't have to pay the price to get A.J. Brown in round 3. So it's that kind of mindset and strategy that I'm really trying to attach myself to as I look at more of these like best offenses in the NFL.
We did have one question earlier. I want to get it in before we head out to set you on the road with. Mike asked your favorite sleeper past round 9 at the wide receiver position.
Man, I know that I've talked about Josh Palmer a lot as probably one of my favorite wide receivers past round 9. Let me just pull up my sleeper list real quick just so I can kind of make sure I'm not missing anybody because I just write about so many different.
Because you go with the rankings, it's not your gut; it's the rankings. Trust the process.
Yeah, right. trying to be as authentic as I possibly can be on the show. But yeah, I think Josh Palmer is still like just kind of like the first one that comes to mind for me. Jalen Tolbert. I know we talked about the Dallas Cowboys a little bit. I mean, Tolbert, dude, mega producer in the college level, and I mean, he's going to start week 1. Michael Gallup's like not going to be ready till like November. And people are still like drafting Michael Gallup like he's going to be fine. They wouldn't have paid Michael Gallup to just rush him back. Like that doesn't make any sense from Dallas's standpoint. So I think that he makes a lot of sense. We talked about Kadarius Toney as another guy that I think can make some noise. Oh, so my other favorite one would probably be Tim Patrick for the Denver Broncos.
Yes.
I know that all the hype is on Sutton and Jerry Jeudy, and I'm on the Courtland Sutton side of that debate, but I'm not going to just totally overlook Tim Patrick and the fact that, you know, with all the horrible quarterback play that Denver has had the past 2 seasons, whenever Tim Patrick has been out there catching passes, he's been scoring touchdowns and scoring fantasy points somehow, some way. Now, Jerry Jeudy hasn't done that. Like Jerry Jeudy and Tim Patrick had the same quarterbacks, and only one of them has scored fantasy points, and it was Tim Patrick. So when you look at the fact that they paid Tim Patrick, when they have if they run 2 tight end sets, who's going to be on the field with Courtland Sutton? Me thinks it's going to be the 2 tight ends, Courtland Sutton and Tim Patrick, and Jerry Jeudy's going to be on the bench. So I like Tim Patrick.
The old Tim Patrick nugget to close us out. That's why you listen to the whole end of the show. You get the extra juice right there. Well, we appreciate you, Andrew. For Andrew, who you can find on Twitter at Andrew Erickson _. For Austin Sear, I'm Big Travie. We're the Fantasy Whispers. We're out. Peace.
Right here.
Hey, you like mock drafting? So do we. Check out one of our previous mocks in the videos here and like and subscribe to catch next week's